Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name's Emily and I love to talk about books and reading, and today we're going to talk about something that I have been wanting to talk about since I started my channel, which is self-help books and some of the reasons they might be a little bit problematic. Guides to behavior and loosely self-help books have been around since the dawn of time practically, but the self-help books that we're going to be discussing today, the ones that you are likely familiar with that are often written by white men, for white men, often straight white men, became really popular in the 1960s. My critiques are mostly about the type of self-help books that are focused on productivity, very individualistic, books such as Power, How to Win Friends and Influence People, books that you would definitely see on the shelf of a 20-something, 30-something, 40-something-year-old man that majored in business. I can't fully hate on this genre, and I won't, because I do think that reading a variety of things is a good thing. A lot of these popular self-help books I have read, so I'm not going to completely bash the genre, but I do think there is a discussion that needs to be had about the way that we consume these, and we need to be a little bit more critical when consuming books that are telling us how to live our lives and how to think. I definitely don't think it's a bad thing to read self-help books in moderation. I do think it could be a bad thing if someone is only reading self-help books and if they're reading them at a quick rate. I think that there are just better ways to accomplish what people are likely looking to accomplish that are doing this. So we're just going to chat a little bit about some of the issues that exist within the genre and within people that only read this genre of book. Starting off with the issue of the frequency of purchase, there is a statistic that says that 80% of people who buy self-help books are repeat purchases, which some might say would indicate that these books aren't working as they're intended to because people are having to consume more than just one. The idea behind that being you should be able to read a self-help book, take the ideas with you, and use them in your life without needing to read more self-help books, because often the advice that is given is nothing new. Typically they say similar things just within different packaging and within different branding and through different voices. So this is not advice that you should need to receive over and over again if you are truly taking and using the advice. I would kind of counter that point and say that inspiration is like bathing. It's only effective if you practice it often. It is really great to revisit different philosophical or nonfiction books at different points in someone's life, because the way that I read a self-help book or the way that I read a philosophical fiction book like Ishmael or The Alchemist, the way that I read those books at 19 are going to be very different from the ways that I read the book at 25 and the way that I read the book at 30, because different things are going on in your life. You'll take different lessons that you need and leave what doesn't resonate. And I think that there is something to be said about revisiting something that had an impact on you to refresh your memory and jog your memory and always be keeping it at the forefront. But I do think that when people consume so many self-help books so frequently, that is likely a result of that advice just not resonating or that advice not being taken into account, or another underlying issue, but I don't think it's a good thing. Learning about something is not the same as doing it. So reading about how to be more productive is not the same as actually being more productive and taking that advice. It's often really easy to learn about these things. These concepts of making your bed is not hard to learn about, but it can be difficult to do on a consistent basis. So I think that sometimes the issue with reading so many of these self-help books and never taking a break from them is almost an escape from actually doing the work that's going to have an impact. The focus needs to be more on implementation than consumption of the advice. I fear that constantly reading these things can often just inflate the ego rather than actually changing someone's life. Another issue that I feel comes up with self-help books is audience consideration. Consider someone that is overworked and burnt out reading a self-help book that says that they need to do more and be more productive. If you're not considerate of who you are and what you need, this can often just have a really negative impact on you and make you feel like you need to be doing more when in fact maybe you need to be doing less. And I do feel that readers are often more self-aware and can avoid this. This problem can be avoided with a lot of self-awareness, but I would also argue that if you're not reading a broad variety of things and you're stuck within one genre, you're not going to have that same level of self-awareness as someone that has really expansive taste and reads a wide variety of books. You will open your mind so much more if you get out of just reading one or two genres, and that's true for any genre really, and that's also advice that can be taken or left, because maybe the purpose of you reading is not to broaden your horizons. If you don't want it, you don't have to do it. If you want to read only one thing for the rest of your life, who am I to tell you not to, you know? The point of audience consideration and being self-aware leads me into the next point, which is media comprehension. Focusing solely on self-help books is going to limit your comprehension of different types of media. Reading philosophy, reading classics is going to widen your comprehension of different types of media. The place we're at in society and some of the things that I see, the discourse that I saw when Taylor Swift dropped the Tortured Poets department and people just couldn't understand a metaphor, made me feel extremely sad in my heart. I think that we need to be, as a society and as a people, better about comprehending what we are taking in. We take in so much content. If we're not conscious of what we're taking in and being critical and thinking, what if the opposite was true? What if this wasn't true at all? Like, what do I believe of this? If we're not doing that as we read and being really conscious readers, we're very susceptible to taking bad advice and groupthink and all the things that we just don't really need more of in our society today, especially in America. There's just so much you could get from a really great fiction book, and I could make a whole other video about all of the reasons that you should read more fiction, and I probably will, but broadening your horizons is going to help you with getting out of book slumps and comprehending media, and maybe make it easier to get some examples of how to integrate different advice into your life. Another issue with self-help books is that it often is a band-aid fix. It's really important that we address the root causes of our emotions rather than trying to run from them by gaining more knowledge. I read an article from The Guardian, this woman talking about how she became addicted to self-help books, and when she experienced the passing of a family member, she turned to reading books about how to deal with grief and used consuming those books as a way to avoid actually feeling and dealing with her own grief. It's really truly one thing to learn about something and another thing to actually do it. Think about learning how to do a physical activity. You can watch on YouTube people do this activity over and over and over again, but then if you go and you get into that situation, you still might not have any idea how to do it because you've only watched and maybe learned, but didn't actually experience and feel it. And our emotions are things that need to be dealt with through feeling, not through intellectualizing them. I feel like that's therapist talk 101, but definitely something to keep in mind. It can be really helpful to learn and understand anxiety and grief and negative emotions, but we shouldn't learn about them as an alternative to feeling them. We should learn about them so that we can feel them more deeply. Another thing to consider when reading self-help books that could potentially be an issue is how individualistic we are as a society and how that's not always the best thing for people. Many best-selling self-help books are obviously focused on the self. As a society, we do need self-aware individuals. I can never tell if I'm saying that word right, ever. I think a lot of the problems that we face, like loneliness, aren't going to be solved by improving yourself. They're going to be solved by being around other people. Oftentimes, the activities that build community don't look like stereotypical productivity. Staying in your house, working, focusing on the grind and all of that, going and being with a community of people, it just doesn't always feel compatible with the ideal productive tasks, but it's just as important. Just like rest, it's productive to get rest. And we oftentimes, I think, forget that and try to do too much, and that can lead us to burnout and feeling isolated and lonely. And we just need to get around people and get into our communities and be kind to people and keep our friends close. Anyone that you encounter has something to teach you, and you have something that can teach anyone that you encounter. Oftentimes, the lessons that you learn from being around people through doing things, you're gonna learn them more thoroughly, more quickly, actually understand them and how they feel versus learning about them from a book. Another issue with self-help is that it can lead to excessive introspection, which can then make people's egos get a little bit out of control. It's definitely really great to be introspective and self-aware, but there comes a point where there can be too much of that, and it's just not healthy to focus so much on yourself when honestly people aren't really paying that much attention to you anyways. It's great to become a better person, but being obsessed with yourself, there's a line that you have to walk, and constantly trying to improve yourself and be better can oftentimes just have the reverse effect and make you an insufferable, huge ego person. So I think that we just need a balance of the empathy that reading fiction brings with the awareness that self-help can sometimes bring. And I would argue that fiction can bring a lot of self-awareness as well, just in a different way. A huge issue that I see within self-help books that really grinds my gears is pseudoscience and folks who are not scientists at all claiming something as fact. I've been slowly reading a book called The Creative Act. In the beginning of the book, the author of this book talked about how he had an ailment that he was able to cure by not following his doctor's advice and taking a more manifestation-focused approach. While I will not say that manifestation does not work, I will say that blanket medical advice given in a book about creativity is never a good idea. Most of the people that are giving this type of advice are not doctors. And even if they are a doctor, they're not your doctor. Not everything applies to everyone. Everybody needs different things physically, mentally, emotionally. When you're reading and when you're writing, you have to be really careful about the generalizations that you make, because health is just not something that you should make blanket generalizations about. I think that this should just always be left out of self-help books. The final thing that I want to talk about is how dystopian it is to have a personal brand. We are not products and we're not commodities, we're people. We are not a company that has to be improving and reporting growth year over year. We're full people that have complex thoughts that oftentimes conflict each other, and we should be joyful and we should be so happy about that and how complex we are and how much we can learn from ourselves and each other, instead of just always focusing on how we're appearing outwardly to people, how we're impacting the bottom line, and all of that. I think that we just really need hobbies that aren't tied to capitalism, hobbies that aren't meant to make us money, hobbies that are just purely for joy, and that is a whole other discussion, but it's just something that self-help books make me think of because they're so often focused about being more productive, being more efficient, being faster, and sometimes that can just take you straight out of the present moment, and it's so much more important to be really present with what you're doing than to get more done and not be present, because if you're not there in the moment, it's just, there's not really a point, you know? And these are all things that I have to constantly remind myself of, because it's truly so hard to be working in your job or doing school at that fast pace and still remaining very conscious and slowed down. Definitely a tangent that I could go on but won't today. All in all, there's no mainstream genre of book that I feel is horrible and shouldn't exist. And I do think that there are some things that we as readers can do to make us better consumers of these books. I think practicing critical reading and remembering that a writer is just another person with a set of opinions and beliefs about the world based on their experiences, and that you might not agree with everything they have to say. So practicing as you're reading, thinking about things from the lens of, do I agree with this? Is this resonating with me, or do I completely disagree with it? And using books as a way to learn about yourself and what you believe and becoming more concrete in what you believe, versus reading a book and adopting everything about it just because it's something that you read from an acclaimed person. Reading a book before you read reviews about the book and developing your own opinions before looking to the opinions of others is another great way to be a really conscious consumer of books. Trusting your intuition as a reader, remembering that life is not that serious and that we shouldn't take ourselves that seriously, that it's good to improve ourselves, but it's also really, really important to slow down, rest, have fun, live a balanced, healthy lifestyle. And then to practice compassion towards yourself and others. I think sometimes when we read things about getting better and being better, it's easy to feel bad about ourselves or feel like we're not doing enough. That thought and that belief is not always a productive one. I would argue that it's most oftentimes not a productive one because it's coming from a negative place. So practicing compassion and doing things because they better your life, not because you feel guilty that you're not doing them. Or alternatively, continue to read only self-help books. We live on a floating rock, so if that's the type of book you enjoy, it's not that serious. Don't let someone on the internet tell you to stop enjoying it, because if you like it, you like it. But hopefully those are some good things to think about when you're going into your next self-help book. I like to have a kind of like a yearly self-help book as a little treat, just to shake things up. But the more that I read them, the more I feel like they're getting repetitive, and that I'm feeling like, okay, I know these things. It's more like doing them that I need to focus on and actually getting them into my life. And sometimes you have an aha moment when you're reading something, but not everything works the same for everybody. I will stop yapping now. Thank you so much for watching. If there's anything that stood out to you in this video, anything that you disagreed with or particularly agreed with, I would love to hear about it in the comments. I would love to hear about your thoughts on self-help books. And if there's anything else you want to hear me do a video about, definitely let me know. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day. Bye.